Hello guys, welcome to the HTML crash course for beginners. Now in this tutorial session we are going to have a look at some important key concepts about HTML, and also we are going to have a look at how to render content appropriately in your web browser with the right usage of HTML tags and elements. So without wasting much time, let's dive in. Okay, so HTML is just a markup language that is used to describe the structure of a website. So, for example, if you want to create a website, you first of all have to describe the form, the structure of that website before you make it presentable or nice with CSS and interactive with JavaScript. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the introduction to HTML in this video because there is a full video dedicated to just that. Now I'm going to leave a link to that in the description, or you can just click on the card popping on this video right now. So without wasting much time, let's move to the next session. Okay, so the basic tools you need to get started with HTML is a text editor and a web browser. Now we are going to create our HTML document with a text editor. The main use of a text editor is for editing text, and since HTML is like raw text, we are going to write that in a text editor. Now the text editor that we are going to use in this tutorial is called Visual Studio Code, or VS Code for short. Now if you don't know what Visual Studio Code is, or if you don't have Visual Studio, don't worry, I'm going to leave a link to a video in the description below, or you can just click on the card popping on your screen right now. And also we are going to make use of the Google Chrome web browser. Now we are going to write our HTML document in a text editor, and the web browser is going to help us to display the contents of our HTML document. Now if you don't have Google Chrome, I'm going to leave a download link in the description below. Okay guys, so before we start writing our HTML document, we first of all have to create a new directory or folder where we can organize our HTML document and also retrieve them easily. So I'm going to create my folder on my desktop. So I just right click and then go to new and then folder. Alright, so now you can give any name to your folder, any name you want, but I am going to name mine code. After that, enter. Now if you're on a Mac, you do likewise. You create a new folder on your desktop or wherever you can access it easily. Alright, so the next thing we have to do now is launch this newly created folder with Visual Studio Code. So to do that, you first of all have to open Visual Studio Code. Okay, so now after launching Visual Studio Code, we need to launch the folder in Visual Studio. In order to do that, you have to go to File and then select Open Folder. Now you see this pop-up dialog box. Now you have to navigate to the location where you created your new folder. Now I created mine on my desktop, so I just have to go to the desktop directory and then there it is. So I just click on it and then click on select folder. Alright, congratulations, you've launched your folder with Visual Studio Code. So the next thing we have to do is we have to create our HTML file in our Visual Studio, in our directory in Visual Studio. So to do that, you have to click on this new file button So you click on this new file button, and then you give a name to your HTML document. But I'm going to name mine index, and I recommend you all to do that. So index, then don't forget the extension for HTML, which is .html. So index.html. After that, you press enter. Alright, so congratulations, you've created a new HTML file in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so in order to create a valid HTML document, we have to provide the valid HTML page structure. So now, to begin with, the page structure comes with a declarative statement which tells the web browser the version of HTML we are using, which is HTML5 in this case. So this is the declarative statement. So you just bring your less than sign, and then you bring your exclamation mark, and then you type doc type. Now, if you can remember, I said that HTML is case insensitive, so you can mix caps lock with, or you can mix uppercase letters with lowercase letters. So you can do something like this: doc type, and it will work just fine. But as I said, we want to be consistent, so let's stick to one convention. So you type doc type, and then you bring space, and then you bring HTML. So doc type HTML, and then you close with your greater than sign. Now this is the declarative statement. Now, right after the declarative statement, the next thing we need is the HTML root element, which contains all the other parts of our HTML document. So you bring your less than sign, and then you type HTML, and then you bring your greater than sign. It does the auto completion for you. So you just press enter, and then now we have to also nest two elements in the HTML root element. Now the elements that we have to nest in the HTML root element are the head element and a body element. So you have to bring your head element, and then right after the head element you bring your body element. So basically this is the HTML page structure. Now, the head contains all the non-visual parts of your website, like the title and other vital information about your website, like the keywords in your website, the author of the website, and also the description of your website. And the body contains all the visible parts, like the paragraph, articles, headings, image, and all that. So this is the valid HTML page structure that you need to get started with HTML. Alright, so in our coding journey, we are going to make use of an extension called Live Server. Now, the use of the Live Server is to automatically launch our web page in our web browser, and also automatically reload our web page contents in the web browser. So it will save us the stress from doing this, going to the document, your folder, sorry, going to the folder, and then going to your HTML document, right clicking on it, and then going to open with, and then choosing the browser you want to launch your website or your web page with. Now this is stressful. That's why we are using the live server. So if you don't have the live server, I'm going to leave a link to that in the description, so you can watch it, or you can just click on the card popping on your screen right now. So now I'll assume you have live server now. So if you have live server installed, all what you have to do is you have to, first of all, let me switch off my autosave. So now you have to right click in your HTML document, just right click in there, and then choose open with live server. Now it will automatically open the web page in a web browser for you. So any changes you make in your HTML document, when you save, it will automatically load it in the web browser for you, so you don't have to manually reload the web browser all the time. So now let's try something. So let's, since the body element contains the visible part of our HTML document, let me write a random text in there, and let's see how this works. So let me just minimize this to my left. Okay, all right, so now let's write something. So something like um hello world. All right, so now save it. So Control S, and then you see automatically the web browser renders or displays the content for us. So now let's add some other text. So I am coding HTML. Now when you save, you see it automatically reloads it for you. So this is why we are going to be using live server in our coding projects. Okay, so let's talk about tags and elements. Now, tags are like HTML keywords that helps us to render content appropriately in the web browser. So if you want to represent a paragraph, you have to use the paragraph tag. You can't use the image tag, or you can't use the header tag for that, because they all have their main purpose or their main usage. So if you want to represent a particular content, you have to use the right tag for that. Now when we talk about elements, we are talking about the opening tag, the closing tag, and then the content. Now let's go back to the tags. Now tags come in pairs. Most of them come in pairs. We have the opening tag, and then we have the closing tag, as you can see on my screen. Let me zoom in so you can see well. All right, so now tags, most of the tags come in pairs. As I said, we have the opening tag and we have the closing tag. Now the difference between the opening tag and the closing tag is the forward slash here. Now take note. All right, so now when we talk about elements, we are talking about, or we are combining the opening tag, the closing tag, and then the content. So when you take the HTML root element, for instance, we have the opening tag, we have the closing tag, and then right in the opening tag and the closing tag, we have some contents in here, which is the head element and the body element. Now if I should represent, or I should um, um, type in some text in the head, it will qualify this as an element, because then we would be having the opening tag, the closing tag, and then the contents in between, right? So now if I want to represent a heading, right, and I bring my heading, the first heading. Now don't worry, we are going to learn about heading soon. So when I bring the first heading and I write my names, just a random text, right? Now this is known as the body element, because we have the body opening tag, the body closing tag, and then right in the body opening and closing tag, we have some content in there, which is another h1 element. Now right in the body opening tag and the body closing tag, we have another element in there, which is the content of the body element. So now let's go through again. I said that tags are like keywords in HTML that helps us to render contents appropriately. So for instance, if I want to represent the first heading, I have to use the first heading tag. I can't use a paragraph for that. You understand? Let me launch this so we see how the web browser renders it. So you go to open with live server. All right, so now as you can see, it's boldens it. Now let me use a paragraph and see. So for instance, if I want to represent a heading with a paragraph, or if I want to represent a heading on my website and I mistakenly place the content in a paragraph tag, let's see what will happen. So paragraph, and then I write hello. Now when I save, now you see the text shrinks, you understand. Now let's change the paragraph to h1 and then see what will happen. So if I change the p to h1 and I save, you see what happens. It boldens it and it enlarges the text, you understand. So this is to tell us that all the tags in HTML have their unique usage, or they have their unique purpose. So you have to use the right tags for the right content you want to render in your website. Okay, now when we say we are nesting an element, it's simple. We are just putting the element within another element. So let me break it down for you guys. All right, so now um, as you can see here, we have the HTML root element, and right in the HTML root element we have two other elements, which is the body element and the head element, or the head element and the body element. So we can say that the head and the body element has been nested within the HTML root element. So with this we will say that the HTML root element is the parent of the head element and the body element. So for example, if I create another element in the body, let's say a paragraph, and then I say maybe hello. Now um, we've nested the paragraph element within the body element. So we would say that the body is the parent of the paragraph and the HTML is the parent of the body, because the body has been nested within the HTML element. And then right in the body we have also nested another element, which is the paragraph element in the body element. So we will say the body is the parent, the body element is the parent of the paragraph element, and then the HTML root element is also the parent of the body element. So for instance, if I nest another element in the head element, let's see title, and I say maybe code. Now we've nested the title element in the head element in the right order. You see they follow a systematic order, or a hierarchy, you understand. So the indentation must be right. So um now you can write without indenting, but it doesn't make your code clear, you understand. So you have to indent them right. So if you are nesting, you have to use spaces or tabs to push the contents into the element you are nesting within, you understand. I'm talking about this. So someone can do this, it's the same thing, you understand. But in order to see your codes clearly, you can just do a tap, you can just press on tap and it will push the nested contents to the right indentation order, you understand. So now with this we can say that the body is the parent of this paragraph and the head is also a parent of this title. Now if we should nest another um, element in the paragraph, let's see the paragraph, we would call that element a child of the paragraph element, because it has been nested in the paragraph. So with this we can say that the body is the parent element of the paragraph, the head element is the parent element of the title, and then the HTML element is the parent element of both the head element and then the body element. So we can call the title and the paragraph elements like the grandchildren of the HTML root elements. So now when we talk about nesting, this is what we are talking about: nesting HTML elements within other elements in the right order. Okay, so when we talk about comments in HTML, we are basically talking about text that are used to describe what our code is about. So for example, you might be working in a team and you might not be the only one working on the HTML document for that team. So any changes you make in that HTML file or document, you have to attach a comment to it, so that in case you leave the project or in case maybe you travel or something, the next person who will come and resume from where you stopped will be able to have a clear idea about what the code is about. So let me show you how to write an HTML or a HTML comment. So now let me open up Notepad and then show you guys. Now to write a comment in HTML, it's very simple. Now all what you have to do is you have to bring your less than sign, you bring an exclamation mark, two dashes, right? And then you type your content. So you can see maybe this is a comment. And then after that, in order to close this comment, you bring your two dashes and then you bring your greater than sign. As simple as that. So this is a comment in HTML. This is how to create a comment in HTML. Once again, you bring your less than sign, you bring your exclamation, two dashes, and then you write the comment. So this is another comment, and then after that you just close it with two dashes and then the greater than sign. As simple as that. So this is a comment. Now one thing you must notice is that comments are not rendered in a web browser. The web browser ignores comments. The main use of the comment is just to describe what your code is about. So for example, let's come back to our HTML code. So right above this first heading element, I can do something like this. I can bring my comment here, so less than sign, exclamation, and then two dashes. Now it does the auto completion for you, so it saves time. So now right in between the two or the four dashes, you bring your comment. So you can see this is the first heading, right? And then you save. Now when you save, let's try and run this in the web browser. So you right click and then open with live server. Okay, so you see we only have hide there. So as you can see, the web browser doesn't, or it ignores the comment. You understand? So the main use of the comment is just to describe what your code is about. So right above the title, you can do something like this. Sorry. So you bring your less than sign, you bring your exclamation, and then your two dashes, and then you just type your contents in there. So you can see this is a title. You understand? So anyone who opens this document can tell that, okay, since you embedded a comment in your code, he or she will be able to tell that, okay, this is the first heading. If the person even doesn't have any idea about the h1 tag, he or she will be able to know with the help of the comment. So these are basically comments in HTML. Now, when you are creating your web document, the first thing you might want to do is give your web document a title. Now, by default, when you check the title bar of your web browser, now you can see that the title of your web document is the HTML document file name you gave. We don't want this. We want to give the web document our own title. So in order to do that, you have to use the title element nested in the head element. So now let's do that. So you come in between the head element and then you just press enter to give a good indentation. Now before we give the title, we have to comment our code. As I said previously, commenting your code is a good practice. It is a good quality of a programmer or a developer. It gives an idea about your code or what your code is about. So now to give a comment in HTML, you bring your less than sign, your exclamation mark, and then 4 dashes, and then you close it with the greater than sign. Now in your Visual Studio Code, now immediately you bring your 2 dashes, it automatically closes. It provides the extra 2 dashes with the greater than sign. So now let's give a comment to our code. So now let's say um, web to web page title. Okay, so now this is our comment. So right after the comment, you bring the title of your web document. So you bring your title tag, and then you close it. Now in between the title elements, you give your title. So now let's name our title my first site. So my first site. Now in order to save, you have to press Ctrl S. So now when you do Ctrl S, the web browser automatically reloads for you, if and only if you are using the live extension. So now if you are not using the live server extension, you have to manually reload it like what I just did. Alright, so now this is the title of our web document. Now when you check the title bar of your web browser, you can see that the title has changed from the default HTML document file name to our current title. Alright, so headings are very important when creating web content, because headings serve as signposts to different sections on your website or your web page. So now HTML headings are in 6 levels. We have the H1 through to the H6. Now the H1 is the biggest heading, and then the H6 is the smallest heading. Now headings, as I said, serve as signposts to sections, different sections on your web page. So if you have a section which talks about you, the developer, or which talks about a company you are developing the website for, you have to create a heading for that section which says, or maybe about Codetopia, or maybe about you the developer. So anytime a reader sees that heading, he or she will know that, okay, right after the heading, all the contents below are about you or the company you are developing the website for. Now in order to create your headings for your web document, you have to do that in the body element, and also you have to use the heading tags, which is the H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and then H6. As I said, headings are in 6 levels from H1 to H6. Now let's do that in the body section. We have to create our headings in the body section because that's where all the visible part of our website needs to be. Now before we start creating our headings, let's do something first. Now we don't want to manually save our web contents all the time, so we want to do that with something we call the autosave. Now in order to switch on the autosave, you have to go to file, and then right before the preferences you can see autosave there. Now mine is checked, which means it's on. Now if yours is not checked, it means it's off, so you have to check it to put it on. So you just click on the autosave, and then you will see a small check beside it, meaning you've switched it on. So now we are done. Alright, so now let's start creating our heading contents. So now in order to do that, you have to go to the body element, and then you press enter to give you this cool indentation. Alright, so now before we start providing our heading elements, let's first comment our code. So now you bring your less than sign, your exclamation, your dashes, and then let's name our comment headings. Alright, so now the autosave automatically saves the document for you, but because this is a heading comment, it won't be displayed in the web browser. As I said, comments are ignored by the browser. Alright, so now let's provide our heading content. So now let's go down right after the heading comment, and then let's bring the first heading, which is the H1. It is the biggest heading, so H1, and then let's name it headings. All right, so heading. All right, so now you see autosave saves it automatically, and then live server also renders your web content automatically. So as you can see here, we have headings here, and then let's copy this. Let's copy this and paste it 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so now let's change. Now you see, because they are all H1, they all have the same font size. So now let's change them. So let's change this to H2. Let's the second one to H2. All right, so you see the font size for the H2 decreases. Now let's do same for the next one. Let's name it H3, because that's the third heading. All right, so as you can see, as I change the values, the heading automatically shrinks. So H5. All right, and the last one H6. All right, so as you can see, H1 is the biggest heading, and then H6 is the smallest heading. So headings in HTML are in 6 layers. We don't have H7, we don't have H8. It's from H1 to H6. So these are the headings in HTML5. Okay, so the paragraph is a passage in a text or document which talks about a particular or specific subject matter. Now, this means that a paragraph must talk about one subject at a time. So with this, HTML provides an element called the paragraph element, which is used for creating paragraphs in web documents or in websites. Now, if you want to create the paragraph element, by now you should know what an element is: the opening tag, the closing tag, and the content. So you must have the paragraph opening tag, your content which you want to give, and the paragraph closing tag. So before we create our paragraph, let's first of all give our comment. Now we are going to name our comment paragraphs. So let's do that. All right, so paragraphs. All right, so now after creating your comment, right below your comment, you give your content. Now before we create our paragraph content, I want to show you something. Now we are going to use some random text known as the lorem text generator. So let's first of all bring our paragraph opening tag and then the closing tag. Now right in between the opening and closing tag, you write your contents. So we are going to use the lorem text generator. Now if you want to use the lorem text generator, you just have to type lorem, lorem, and then you press enter. Now it's going to generate some random text for you that you can use for your um, practical codings and all that. Now if you don't want to use any sensible statement, you can just use the lorem text to practice or to rehearse or something. Now some of you might realize that when you type the lorem text and then you press enter, the statement or the sentence is being generated on a single line. Now this makes it very difficult for reading, since you would have to just scroll the horizontal scroll bar to the end of the text before you can see the end of the sentence. Now this makes it very difficult for reading, as I said. So in order to prevent this, we have something we call the word wrap. You just have to turn it on and then you are done. So in order to turn on the word wrap, you go to file and then you go to preferences and then you choose settings. Now in the settings search box, just type word wrap. So WORD WRAP, word wrap. So after typing, then you just press enter, and then you go to the second row which says editor word wrap controls how lines should wrap. Now just click on the down pointing arrow and then choose on, and then after selecting on, just go back to your web document. Now as you can see, it makes the text responsive. It responds to the width of your Visual Studio text editor. Now if you want to use more text than the one Lorem automatically provides, you can just do something which I'm going to show you right now. Just type Lorem and then add the number of words you want Lorem to provide. So if I want 200 words, I just have to type 200 attached to the Lorem. So as I said, if you don't want Lorem, or if you don't want the short statements Lorem or the short sentences Lorem provides, you can just add the number of words you want Lorem to come with. So if I want 200 words, after typing Lorem, I just have to add the 200 to it. So I'm just trying to say, Lorem, please give me 200 words or something. Now after that, just press enter. Now as you can see, it gives you a whole statement, a long statement. Now let me maximize my web browser. So as you can see, it gives you this long statement which you can use for practical reasons. Now let's create another paragraph. So let's do that. So you bring your opening tag and then your closing tag, and then you type your sentence. So let's do that. So Lorem and then 40. All right, so I'm just saying, Lorem, please give me 40 words. So when I press enter, as you can see, it gives me another sentence. All right, so this is how you can create paragraphs in your web document. Okay, when creating web documents, some of you might want to give special meaning to some words or text in your web document, like making a word or a text bold, making it italic, and also showing that a word or a text has been deleted from your web document. Now you can do all these things by using the special element HTML provides, known as the HTML formatting element. So let's just go through few of them and know how they can be used in our web document. So before I do that, I want to give out a comment showing that I'm about to start with a formatting element. So let me name my comment formatting. All right, so now right below the formatting comment, let me just create another paragraph and then give in some random text to it. All right, so Lorem and then 40 and then enter. All right, so now live server automatically reloads it in my web browser. So let me maximize my web browser so we can see the text very well. All right, so now this is the text. Okay, so now for example, let's say I want to make this word bold. I have to use the bold formatting elements, which is the B, which comes with the B opening tag and the B closing tag. So I just have to take this word out, introduce the bold element, the HTML bold element, and then I paste my word in between. I nest it in between. So as you can see, the word becomes bold. Now I can also use another um, element known as the strong element. It's also a formatting element. So for example, if I want to make this word strong, now the strong element is used for making text important. It is used to show that a particular word is very important in its context. You understand? So let's say I want to make this text, or I want to show that this text is important, I have to use the strong element. So I just have to take the word out, introduce a strong opening tag, close it, with a closing tag, and then in between I nest the word. Okay, so as you can see, this word also becomes bolded, you understand, just as the first one. The main difference is that the second one, it's an important text. It just shows that that word is important. Now we also have another formatting element known as the italic element. It is used for making words or text italic, you understand. So if I want to make this word italic, I just have to take it out, introduce the italic element, the I, it is, or you can call it the I element. So you bring your I opening tag, and then your I closing tag, and then in between you nest the word. Now as you can see, the word has been italicized, right? We also have another formatting element which also behaves like the italic element, but the difference is that the second one, which I'm about to use right now, shows that a word has some emphasis, or a word has been emphasized on by the developer. So you just have to pay close attention to that particular word. So if I want to stress more emphasis on a particular word, for instance this one, if I want to show that this word has some important emphasis on it, I can just take it out and then introduce the em element. So em, and then close it with the em closing tag, and then I nest it between. So now as you can see, this word also becomes italicized. Now the main difference is that between the em and the I is that now this one shows that an element um, represents, or an element has been emphasized on, you understand. So please, I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can have a closer look at their differences. So now we also have another formatting element known as the del, or the del element. Now this del element is used to show that a particular word or text has been deleted, you understand. So now if I want to show that this word has been deleted, this word, if I want to show that this, or this statement, sorry, if I want to show that this sentence has been deleted from the web document, I just have to take it out, and then I introduce the del opening tag and the closing tag, and then I nest the word in between. So when I paste it, so as you can see, it shows that the word has been deleted. Awesome, right? So with HTML we can do a whole lot of stuff in our web documents. So now we also have another formatting element known as the insert element, or the ins element. It shows that a particular word has been inserted in a web document. So for example, if I want to show that this word has been inserted, I just have to take it out and then introduce the ins, and then close it, and then I paste it in between, I nest it in between. So now as you can see, it shows that the word has been inserted. So it's just like you filled a blank space with a word, which shows that you've inserted that word. So now let me just go through two more formatting elements, and then that will be it. So now we also have an element known as the subscript element, and also we also have another one known as the superscript element. Now for instance, if I'm creating a website for science students, and then I get to a point where I have to give out the chemical formula for water. So we all know that, or some of you who are good in science will know that the chemical formula for water is H2O, right? I hope you got that right. So H2O. Now, this is the chemical formula for water. Now, we all know that, or some of you might know that when you are writing the chemical formula for water, the 2 is right below the H and the O. It is not on the same line. It is below the normal line. So now, how do I represent that in HTML? Someone may ask, or someone might ask. Now to do that, I just have to take the 2 out and then use an element known as the HTML subscript element. Subscript. Now the subscript element takes the word or the character below the normal line. So if I want to write the correct form of H2O, I just have to write H, and then the 2 has to go below the H and the O, then I bring my O. So now to represent that kind of H2O or that kind of 2, I just have to bring my subscript, sub, so I bring my sub in between the H and the O. I close it with my sub closing tag, and then I paste the 2, so I just write the 2. So now as you can see, let me maximize this. Oh sorry, not the text editor, the web browser. All right, so now as you can see, the 2 goes right below the H and the O. Interesting, right? All right, so now um, we also have the opposite element of this subscript element, which is known as the superscript element. Now the superscript element takes a text or a word above the normal line, not below. Now the sub takes the word or the text below, and the superscript, which is the sup, takes the word above or the character above. You understand? So for example, if I want to represent a text above the normal line, for example, let me just create some random text. So this is a superscript word, right? Now if I want to make this superscript word above the normal line, all what I have to do is use the sup tag. So all what I have to do is at the beginning of the sentence, or at the beginning of the word which I want to send above the normal line, I just have to bring the um sup, right, and then close it. Now I just have to nest the word in between, so I just have to take these two words out and then nest them in between the sup element. So I paste it, and then as you can see, now you can see that this word or this sentence is above the normal line, right? It is not on the same line. So these are some of the cool stuff you can do with HTML formatting element. There are lots of them, and we can't go through all of them in this video, so I'm going to leave a link to some of them in the description. You can go online and then you can learn more online. Okay, so now if you want to list some elements in your web document, you can do so by using the HTML list element. Now we have the ordered list and the unordered list. Now with the ordered list, listed items are being marked with numbers. So in numerical order, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and all that. And with the unordered list, listed items are being marked with bullets. So by default, ordered list items are being marked with numbers, and by default, unordered list items are being marked with bullets. So now let's start with the ordered list. So before we do that, let's create our comment. So now let's name our comment ordered lists. Alright, so now right below your comment or right after your comment, you start with the ordered list. So now to begin with the ordered list, you have to include the ol tags. So now you have to bring the ol opening tag and then close it with the ol closing tag, meaning ordered list. So now let's do that. So you bring your opening tag ol and then you close it with a closing tag. All right, so now right in between we nest our items. So now to list an item, you have to use the li element. So you bring li, and then right in between the li closing opening and closing tag, you bring the name of your item. So let's say we are listing or we are creating a list of foods. So let's do that. But first of all, let me minimize my web browser font. Alright, so now the first item, we are going to name our first item orange. All right, so now as you can see here, our first item is 1, which is orange. And then let's go on. So second item, let's name it mango. All right, so as you can see here, we have mango. And then the third one, let's name it pear. All right, so now we have pear here. All right, so now as you can see, with the ordered list, items are being marked with numbers. So let's add one more list or one more item. So li, and then let's see pawpaw. So as you can see, the fourth item is pawpaw. So now let's list the same elements in the unordered list and let's see how that goes. All right, so now let's create another comment and let's name this comment unordered list. All right, so now right after the comment, we start with our unordered list. Now, if you want to list items in the unordered list, you have to use the ul element. So you bring your ul, meaning unordered list, and then right in between the opening and the closing tag, you start listing your items. So now let's do that. So now before you list an item, as I said previously, you have to use the li element. So now let's say orange. So now as you can see here, the first element is being marked with the bullet right below here. All right, so now let me maximize so we can see. All right, so as you can see here, we have orange with a bullet. And now let's go to the next item, mango. All right, the third one, pear. All right, and then the fourth one, pawpaw. Pawpaw. Now, when you view this in your developer tool, you can see that the web browser renders this in the appropriate tag you are using. So now to invoke developer tool, if you are on Windows, you can use the Control Shift I. Now, if you're on Mac, you can use the Command Option and I. So now you can see here, right in the developer tool, you can see that we have OL here. Now let me maximize it so we can see. Now you can see we have OL right here. Now if I expand this, you can see we have our elements in there. If you expand the elements also, you can see we have orange, you can see we have mango, you can see we have pear. Now we will make efficient use of the developer tool when we are coding CSS, so don't worry about this. So I'm just trying to tell you that if you want to render contents appropriately in your web document, you have to use the appropriate tag for that. So now this is how to list elements in your HTML or items in your HTML web document. Okay, so now you can also create tables in your HTML document. Now before we talk about tables, I want to do something first. I should have done this long ago. Now I want to push the contents to the middle of our web browser so that we don't have to strain our eyes watching the bottom of our web browser. So now I'm going to do this with CSS. Don't worry yourself about this for now. We are going to learn about CSS in subsequent videos, so don't worry. So I'm going to create a margin button for the body elements. So margin button 500 pixel. Now it's going to push. All right, so it's going to push the contents to the middle. All right, so you are done. Okay, so now let's talk about the table elements. All right, so for instance, you want to create a table containing a list of students and their age. So you have the first name of the student, the second name of the students, and then the age of the student. Now before we do that, let's have a quick look at a rough sketch in Paint application. All right, so this is a rough sketch I made. All right, so now to create a table in HTML, you have to use the table element. So in the table element, we have two sections. we have the head section and we have the body section. Now, for the head section, you have to use the T head for that. And in the body section in the table, you have to use the T body. Now, right in the table head, we have a row. So TR, table row. And then in the table row, we have the titles of the fields in the table. So we have first and we have second. And then in the table body, we have another row which has two data, which is which we use the TD for. So TD means table data. So the first table data is Mercury and the second table data is Venus. So now in the table heading, we have a row as you can see here, and then there are two contents in a row, which is the first and the second. So they'll all be displayed in a row. And then in the T body, which is the table body, we have another row. And then in the table row, we have two data. And then the first data is Mercury, as you can see here. And the second data is Venus. So they will also be displayed in rows, as you can see here. So now let's go to our web browser and our text editor, so we demonstrate, or I demonstrate to you. So now we want to create a table containing three columns. So we have a column for the first name, a column for the second name, and a column for the age. So now let's give our comment first. So let's name our comment table. All right, so now right below our table comment, let's create our table. So now you have to include the table elements. So now after bringing your table elements, you have two sections. So we have the table head, and then right after the table head, we have the table body, right? Okay, so now in our table head, we have three columns, right? And the columns have labels, and the labels are in rows. So we have the first name, second name, and then we have the age. So let's do that. So TR, table row, and then right in the table row, we have the headings of the columns. So the first table heading is first name, and then the second table heading is what? Is second name, and then the last table heading is the age, right? So the age. Okay, so now as you can see in our web browser, let me maximize it. All right, so as you can see, we have three columns, right? We have first name, we have second name, and then we have age. Now this is very ugly. Now you can do some stylings with CSS, so don't worry about that. We will learn about CSS very soon. All right, so now we are done with our table headings. So we've given the labels of titles to our fields or our columns, right? So now we want to input some data into our table, so we have to do that in the table body, right? In the table body. So now any new member or any new member information you want to input into your table, you have to create a new row for that. Okay, so let's say you want to input information about Jane Land, who is a student in our school. So what we have to do is we have to introduce the T row, right? The T row, because we are going to represent that information on a row. So T row, and then in the row we start with our data. So TD, right? So first name, what is the first name? So Jane. And then the second name, so TD, another TD. So second name, land. And then the age, so TD and then age. So her age, let's say 24. All right, so as you can see here, under the first name we have Jane, under the second name we have land, and then age we have 24. So let's say we want to enter another student info. so we need to introduce another tr, and then right in the tr we input the data, so td, and then let's see frost. That's the name, that's the first name for our second student, so frost, and then td, let's see Jack, and then the age of Jack is 23. Okay, so as you can see, we are creating our table, unique, right? All right, so let's enter the last student, so another tr, so table row, and then table data, the first name, so we say Vin, and then the second name we say Dash, so Dash, and then the age is 28. All right, so you see we've created our table with a student content. Cool, right? So this is how to create a table in HTML. Now you can give it a border in your table opening tag, but that's another topic for another day. So we are going to learn about attributes very soon. So this is how to create tables in your HTML web document. HTML attributes give extra description or information about an element. Now this is the format for creating an attribute. Now you must do that in the opening tag. So you would have your attribute name, the equal to sign, and then your attribute value. So for example, if you are creating a border for your table element, you would have the border, the name border, as your attribute name, and then right after the equal to sign you would have your attribute value enclosed with double quotes. Now when creating multiple attributes in your HTML opening tag, you must separate them with spaces. So if you have two or more attributes in your HTML opening tag, you have to separate them with spaces. So without wasting much time, let's go back to our HTML web document and have a closer look at how attributes can be used and what they can do. Okay, so in our HTML web document, we created a table with some content, right? And Live Server automatically rendered the content for us in our web browser. So as you can see here, we have our table here. Now, some of you might find it difficult looking up the contents in the table. So in order to solve that, we must create a border for our table. So we are going to use the border attributes. So we are going to have a look at how we can create attributes and how they are being rendered. So now we learned that we must create the attributes in the HTML opening tag, right? So let's do that in our table opening tag, because as you can see here, we have the opening tag here and then the closing tag right here, right? So let's do that in our opening tag. So you give a space, and then since we are using the border attribute, we are going to use the border attribute name. So you type border, right, and then you bring your equal to sign, then you bring the border value. So now as you can see, Live Server automatically knows that we want to use the border, so it creates the border for us, but we must give this a value if we want to be specific. So you bring your double quotes in your HTML opening tag, and then you bring your attribute value, so we can see 2 pixel, right? Okay, so now the more or the higher you go, the bigger the border gets. So let's say we want to change this to 10 pixel. As you can see, the width of the border increases. So let's go back to 2 pixel. Okay, so now you can clearly read the contents in your table. So this is how HTML attributes look like. So you have your HTML attribute name, and then you bring your equal to sign, and then right after your equal to sign you bring your attribute value. So in this case we used the HTML border or the HTML table border attributes. So you have your border name, which is our attribute name, your equal to sign, and then the attribute value. So this is how we can use attributes in our HTML document. As we proceed, we are going to learn more and more about different types of attributes that we can use in our web documents. Okay, now so our HTML documents contains lots of sections, right? We have the right from the top, we have the heading section, we have the paragraph section, we also have the ordered list section, on ordered list section, and so on. Now you might want to clearly divide these sections in your web document. Now you can do that with an element known as the horizontal rule element. Now it comes with the HR tag, and it is an empty element or an empty tag, which means that it does not have a closing tag. So now let's divide our web document with the horizontal rule elements or tag. So now right after our headings, we want to create a line to divide the headings from the paragraph. So right after or right before the paragraph comment, on your next line you bring your horizontal rule element or tag. As I said, it's an empty tag, which means it does not have a closing tag. So as you can see here, we have right after the heading section, we have a line dividing it from the paragraph section. So now let's do the same for the formatting section. So okay, right before the formatting section, we bring our HR. Okay, so now as you can see, we have another line here. All right, so now right before the ordered list section, let's create another line, horizontal rule. Okay, now right before the table, let's create another horizontal rule. Okay, so now this how you can create lines in your web or HTML web document. You can use the horizontal rule or the HR tag for that. Alright, so HTML provides another empty tag known as the BR tag or the break tag. Now it is used for creating line breaks between text, right? So now, for example, let's create a paragraph and create line breaks within them. So before we do that, let's give our um, horizontal rule to divide the sections. Okay, so now right after our horizontal rule, let's create a paragraph and let's create some random text in there. Okay, so let's say Lorem 40. Now when I press enter, it gives this random text. Now this is not enough. Let's create more. So Lorem again, and then 60. Okay, so now we have this random text, and then in between this random text we want to create some line breaks. We want to push some of the text to new lines. Okay, so in order to do that, you can use the BR tag or the break tag, the line break tag. So let's say right after this word we want to push the rest of the sentence to the next line. So let's locate this word in our HTML document. So as you can see, there it is. Okay, so now I don't know how to pronounce this. So right after the word we give our BR tag. So as you can see, it pushes the rest of the content to the next line. So let's create another line break in our paragraph. So let's say you want to push, let's say you want to push statements after this word to the next line. So let's locate this word in our HTML web document. So there it is. Okay, so right after the word you give a line break. So BR. Alright, so as you can see, it pushes the rest of the statements or sentence to the next line. So this is known as the line break. It is used for creating line breaks in text or sentences in your HTML web document. So anytime you want to push a sequence of text or a sentence or a statement to a new line, you can use the break element for that. Now let me show you this. Now this is more of a bonus. So if you want to create extra spaces between two elements, now this is not advisable, but for fun, if you want to create extra spaces between two elements, you can use the BR for that. So let's say we want to create extra spaces between unordered lists and the table element, so we can use the BR tag for that. So let's now, when I bring the BR tag, as you can see, it pushes the table elements further. So let's bring the BR tag again. So as you can see, it pushes it further. So to create extra spaces between your elements, you can use the BR tag for that. Okay, so to insert an image in your HTML web document, you have to use the HTML image tag or the HTML img tag. Now, the HTML image tag is an empty element, which means, or an empty tag, which means it does not have a corresponding closing tag. Now, before we dive into the HTML image tag, let's first of all get an image that we are going to insert in our HTML document. So now, right on my desktop, as you can see, I have an image here, right? And I've named my image, or I've renamed it forest. So in order to use this image, I'm going to save or store this image in the same directory or folder as my HTML web document. So as you can see, I have my HTML folder here, or my HTML website folder here, which I named code, if you can remember. So I'm going to open that. Okay, and I'm going to paste the image right in here with the HTML document. So I'm going to copy this image. So right click and then copy, and I'm going to paste it alongside the HTML web document. So paste. So now this is the image. So as you can see here, this is the image we are going to be using in our web document. So let's go back to our HTML web document in our text editor and insert our image. Okay, so now we have our image now. Now when you check your Visual Studio File Explorer, you can see that right in the code folder we have the forest image, right? So as you can see, this is the code folder. You can choose to maximize or minimize it. All right, so now in the code folder we have the forest image and our web document. Okay, so now let's insert our image. Now before you insert your image, you have to use the image tag. Now as I said, the image tag is an empty tag, which means it does not have a corresponding closing tag. So now let's insert our image, but before we do that, let's give a horizontal rule. So let's do that. So HR, all right, and let's create our comment. So we are going to name our comment image. Okay, so now right below your image comment, you bring the image tag, so the less than sign, and then you type img and then you close it. Now this is the HTML image tag. So right in the image tag, now the image tag has two important attributes: the source attribute and the alt attribute, or the alternate attribute. So let's do that. So you bring your source src and your value. Now let's leave the value for now. Now as I said, if you have two or more attributes in your HTML opening tag, you have to separate the attributes with a space. So since we are about to introduce a new attribute, let's give a space and then bring the second attribute. Okay, so now we have the source attribute name, the equal to sign. We are about to give the value, right? And we also have the auth attribute name. We have the equal to sign, and we are about to give our value. Okay, so the src attribute specifies the file path of your image, or in your src attribute, as the value you have to give in the location of your image. Since our image is located in the same folder as our HTML web document right here, as you can see, we just have to give reference to the name, which is the forest dot jpg. So let's do that. So now when I type forest.jpg, which is the name of my image, you can see it being rendered in our web browser. Now our image is too wide, don't worry, we will solve that in a jiffy. Okay, so the alt attribute specifies an alternative text to be displayed in your web browser in case your image fails to load. Now this might happen due to invalid URL path and all that. So for instance, let's say you misspelled or made an error in your URL file path, um, because some of you might be loading your image from a website or from your cloud storage or all that. Now if you make a mistake with a link to your image, um, you should create, or you should provide an alternative text that will be displayed in case the image fails to load. Now if I should misspell my forest name, instead of one R I bring two R's. Now this is an error because with the original image the right name is forest, not forest with two R's. So now our web browser will fail to load the image. In doing this, we have to provide an alternative text that will be displayed in case the image fails to load due to one or two reasons. So if I should provide an alternative text, let's say forest. Okay, so as you can see, the image failed to load. So the alternative text will take over. It will tell the web viewer that okay, there was an image which was supposed to be loaded by the web browser, but due to one or two reasons, or due to the carelessness of the web developer, the image failed to load. So this is to tell you that there's an image here. So let's say I realized this and corrected the file URL. So I provided the right spelling of my forest. Now as you can see, the image pops up. So if I should make a mistake again, as you can see, the alternative text will take over. So this is the main use of the alt attribute. It provides an alternative text to your image in case the image fails to load. Okay, so you can also change the width and height of your image using the width and height attribute. So right in our image tag, let's provide two extra attributes. So we have the width with its value, and then since we are providing two or more attributes, we give a space between the attributes, remember that. And then you give a space and then you type the height. Now since we've switched on word wrap, if the code is getting longer, the word wrap um, functionality will push some of the text to the next line. So nothing is broken here, it's just word wrap working, doing its work. So we have the width and we also have the height. Now if I should increase my text editor, you can see we have, okay, we have width and height here, right? Okay, now let's let's move back to the previous size. Okay, so now you can change the width and height of your image. Now we have our width attribute here, we also have our height attribute here. Now with the value, it can be in percentage and also pixel, right? There are also other units that you can use. We are not going to dive into that in this video. So with the width, now this image is too stretchy, so I want to, and it's more than the given width of our web browser, so I want to fix that. So I can say with the width value, I can say 100 pixel px, and as you can see, the image decreases. Now I want to create a responsive image, so I should use percentages for that. So I can say 100%, and as you can see, our image occupies the given width of our web browser. So now if I should increase my web browser, the image increases along, right? As you can see, if I should decrease it, it shrinks. So now this is a responsive image. Okay, so with the height, you can also give it a value. You can say 400 pixel, and as you can see, the image is too stretchy now. Now we don't want this, we want a responsive image, as I said. So you can say 100 pixel also for the height, 100 pixels. So now as you can see, our image is cool and it's neat. Now when you maximize your web browser, you can see we have a cool image here. Alright, so now with our image tag, we have the src attribute, we have the alt attribute, we also have the width and the height attribute. The src attribute specifies the URL of your image, the location path of your image. The alt attribute specifies the alternative text to display in case your image fails to load. We have the width, which specifies the width of your image, and also the height, which specifies the height of your image, and they can be in pixels and percentages. Okay, so the World Wide Web or the internet is made up of links that enables us to navigate to other sections on the internet or in our web document. Now, HTML provides us with an element known as the A element or the anchor element, which enables us to create links in our web document. So let's create a link in our web document. Okay, so before we create our link, let's first of all create our horizontal rule. So HR. Okay, so we have our line here, and then right after our horizontal rule, let's create our comment, or let's give a comment. I'm going to name this comment link. Okay, so right after our link comment, let's create a paragraph. So P, all right, and let's give it a random text. So let's say lorem 40, and then enter. Okay, so now we have some random text here. Now you might want to create your link in your paragraph or after your paragraph. So now let's create our link now. Okay, so in our paragraph, we want to create a link which will redirect our users to the Google homepage, right? So now in our paragraph, let's first of all create the text. So we want to name the link click me, right? So now this will be our link right here. So now let's turn this into our link. Now to create your link, you have to use the A element, as I said. So you would have the A opening tag, the click me, and then the A closing tag. So now let's take off the click me text. Okay, so let's take off the click me text, and let's create our link element. So as you can see here, we have the A opening tag and we have the A closing tag right here, right? Okay, so now right in between the A opening and closing tag, let's paste the click me text. So let's paste it. All right, so now you can't see any changes for now because we have not included the href attributes. Now this brings us to the two main or most used attributes in the link opening tag, which is known as the href and the target attribute. Now we have a text known as click me, right? And we want to change this text into a link. So to do that, in our anchor opening tag, we have to give two attributes. So let's start with the first one. So the first one is the href, right? So we have the href name, the equal to sign, and the attribute value. So this is an example of an attribute as we saw in previous sections. So now in this href attribute, you have to give the URL of your link. So any web or URL or file path we give here will redirect the user when he or she clicks on the click. So now let's give our URL or our uniform resource locator. So let's give our URL. We are going to use the Google web page URL. So let's see HTTPS. Okay, and then we say www.google.com. Okay, so now when the user clicks on the click me, it will redirect the user to the Google web page. So now let's do that. Okay, so now let's click on our link and let's see what will happen. So now we have a link known as the click me link, and we redirected the click me text to the Google web page. So now let's do that. Let's click on the link and see what will happen. So now if I should click on the click me, so now as you can see, we are on the Google web page. Now some of you might want to load the web page in a different tab. Now this is known as a tab, so you might want to load the web page in a different tab like this. So now this brings us to the next attribute known as the target attribute. Now the target attribute specifies whether you want to load the link or the loaded link in a new tab or in the same tab. So now by default, if I should click on the click me, the link is being loaded in the same tab. So now let's change that and load the link or the website in a different tab. So now this brings us to the second attribute known as the target. So I said that if you have multiple attributes in your opening tag, you should separate them with spaces. So as we are about to introduce the second attribute, which is known as the target, let's give a space and give our attribute. So target, so our equal to sign, and then our attribute value. So now if you want to load your link in a new tab, you have to use what we call the blank. So you bring an underscore and then you type blank. So let me go over again. Now I said that most of you might want to load your website or your link in another tab. So in order to do that, you have to introduce another attribute known as the target. Now the target attribute specifies whether the link should be loaded in a new tab or in the same tab. So by default, if I should click on the click me, my link is being loaded. Okay, so because I provided the blank, it's loaded it in another tab. So now let me take off the target attribute. Okay, so now and let's load, or let's click on the link. So when I click on the link, you see the link is being loaded in the same tab as our web document. Now we don't want this. We want to load, or you might want to load the link in a different tab. So in order to do this, you have to provide an attribute known as the target attribute. So target, your equal to sign, and then your attribute value. Okay, so now in order to load the link in another tab, you have to provide the blank value. So you give an underscore and then you type blank, BLANK. So target, and then you bring your equal to sign, your quotation marks, and then in your double quotes you bring the underscore and then blank. So now live server has automatically rendered content. So now let's click on the click me text again. So now when I click on the click me, you see it has been loaded in a different tab. So now you can also link other HTML web documents to your main HTML web document. Now we are going to see that in the bonus round, so stick around guys. Okay, so sometimes you might want to take some data from your website viewers. The data might be their last name, their first name, second name, their email address, Gmail address, or something. Now, the aim of this might be to send them some articles over the weekend so they can read something about your website or a course you are coming up with, or a coding camp or something you are coming up with. Now, in order to take their data like the first name, last name, second name, email address, and all that, you can use an element known as the HTML form element. HTML provides an element known as the form element, and you can use that element for taking user data. So now let's talk about the form element. So before we do that, let's first of all give our comment. Let's name this HTML comment form. Okay, so form, but before that, let's give our line break, sorry, a horizontal rule, so HR, and then right below we give our comments, so form, and then right below our comments we have to introduce the form element, the HTML form element. So anytime you want to interact with the user in terms of taking their data for processing um, um, information or something, you introduce what we call the HTML form element, which is like a container for collecting user data. So you introduce your form and then you close it with the closing tag. So we have the form opening tag right here, and we also have the form closing tag. Okay, so let's talk about two important form attributes that you might want to include in your form element. So we have the action attribute, and we also have the method attribute. Okay, so now since this is a crash course, I'm not going to dive deep into these attributes. I will make a standalone video about the form elements and we are going to dive deeper. Okay, so now the action attribute specifies where the form data should be submitted to, right? So now after the user fills out the form, his or her first name, second name, last name, email address, and all that, after he or she clicks on the submit button, the action attribute takes care of where that form data should be submitted to. And also the method attribute specifies how the form data should be submitted, right? So we have the post method and the get method. Okay, so let's ignore these attributes for now and come back to them later. Okay, so now let's accept some user data, but before we do that, let me pull up my paint application so I show you something. Now some of you might notice some of these things on some websites you visit. So we have, you might have, or you might see something like this: the first name with an input field, second name with an input field beside it, and all that. Now the first name, second name, and email name is known as the label. So you have the label and you have the input field. So the first name, the second name, and the label is known as what? The label. So I just said that. So first name, second name, and email is known as what? The label. And then right beside the label or right below, you might have your input field right there. Okay, so now let's go to our text editor and write some code. Okay, so now we want to accept the first name, second name, and email. So let's start with the first name. So we have to give it a label. So label, right? Now, right in between the opening tag and the closing tag, you bring the label name. So first name. Okay, so now we have our label here. All right, so now right after the label element, you bring the input. So input, so this will be the field for the first name label. Now I want you to take note of something. Okay, so your input field can be on the same line as the label, right? It's the same thing. Okay, so now there's something I want to talk to you about. When dealing with labels and input, there are some key attributes that you have to be very careful you don't take away. In the label, you have to specify the field that the label belongs to. Now you can do that by using the for attribute, the for. Now you come back to that later. Now, and also in the input field, you have to specify some attributes which are very important. So just follow. Now you have to specify the type of input you want to take, whether it's a text, it's a password, email, or checkbox, or whatever. Now in the input field, as I said, you have to specify the type of input you are dealing with. And also, since we have the for attributes here, you also have to specify the ID. Now the ID and the for has to be the same, right? Take note of that. Now, so we have the type attribute, the ID attribute, and we also have the name attribute. Now these are very important. We also have the name attribute. Now if you don't specify the name attribute, this input field is not going to be submitted, so take note of that. So now with the for attribute, you are just trying to say which input field does this label belong to. So we say first name, right? So first name. Okay, so now as I said, the for and the ID must be the same, so you also type the same thing here. So first name. Now one important thing to note about doing this for and ID thing is that now in case you are navigating through your form and then you want to focus on the first name field without clicking in the field, now because you specified the for and the ID and they are the same, you can click on the first name, and as you can see, you get this autofocus. All right, so now with the type, since this is just a text, you write text. Now we have different types of inputs. Now we'll go through them in subsequent videos. Now also with the name, as I said, you have to specify the name of the input field, else this input field is not going to be submitted. So now let's think of something. So we are going to give this input field f name. So this is the name of our input field, so first name, f name. Okay, so now there's another attribute I want you to take note of, which is the value. Now if you give a value to this value attribute, any value you give to this value attribute is going to be displayed in the input field. So for example, if I type this first name, okay, so let's leave it like this. So first, if I should type first, as you can see, first is being displayed in the input field. Now the disadvantage of this is anytime you want to fill out this input field, you have to clearly delete the text in there. Now this is very boring, right? So HTML5, in place of the value, provided an attribute known as the placeholder. So we have placeholder. So any value you give to this placeholder attribute is going to be provided in the input field, but it's going to be grayed out. So if I should type first name, right, first name, now as you can see here, it's being grayed out in the first name input field. Cool, right? Okay, so now with this example, let's create other form fields. So let's create the second name field. So first of all, you have to bring your label, so label, right, and then you bring your for. So this is for the what, the second name. All right, so now you type the name of the label, so second name, my bad, so second name. Okay, so now as you can see, we have our second name here, but we don't want it to be on the same line as the first name, so we have to do what? Yes, we have to give it a line break. So right after the first name input, we give our br tag. So where is it? All right, so here it is. So right after the first name input field, we give our br. Okay, so now it's on the next line. So let's give another br again to give it an extra space. So okay, so now we have our second name label. Okay, so now let's provide our input label or our input field for the second name label. So you do that, so input. Okay, so now in the input you give your type, which is what? Text, right? The type of this field is a text, remember that. So text, and then id, as I said, id should be the same as the for in the label. So second name, please check your spellings. And then after that we give our name. Okay, name, so s name. Now this name attribute will come in handy when you are dealing with JavaScript, so don't worry about that for now, but always remember it is very, very imperative you include the name attribute in the input field. Okay, so now the next attribute we have to give is what? The placeholder, just to give the user an idea of what to enter into that particular field. So placeholder should be what? So second name. Oh, sorry, I should have provided a space right here. Okay, right, so first name. Okay, so now we have our first name, we have our second name. Okay, so now let's take the email. All right, so label, but first of all let's give our line break, so br to give 2 extra spaces before the email label. So label. Okay, and all right, so let me do this. Okay, so label, and then right in between the label opening tag and closing tag, we give it the name email. Okay, so we have our email here. So next thing we have to do is provide our input field. So input, we have the type, we have the id, we also have the name. Okay, and you can give your placeholder, and not forgetting your for. All right, so now for the for attributes, we are going to name this email. Okay, so email, and then type. The type is email, not text, so remember that. So email, and then our ID should be the same as a 4, so email. Okay, so let's change this to a capital E. All right, so the name is also going to be email. All right, and then our placeholder, we can say enter email. Okay, all right, so now we have our first name, second name, email. Okay, so now let's talk about the checkbox and the radio inputs. Okay, so let's talk about the HTML radio buttons. Now, the HTML radio buttons allow the user to select only one option. So let's say we want to know the gender of the user. We can either take the male value or the female value. The user cannot choose both. So let's have a look at the radio button. But first of all, let's give a general label to our gender button. So let's make that a paragraph and call that choose gender. All right, so we have choose gender here. Now right after the choose gender overall label, let's give our buttons. So we are going to give the first button as male and the second button as female. Okay, so let's create the male button first, but we are going to make it the button and then the button label. So let's do that. So first of all, let's bring the button. So you bring input, right? And then let's close it. Okay, so this input type is not an email input field, and it's not also a text field. So let's give the type. So the type, you have to use radio, right? So input type radio, and then let's give our label. Okay, so our label is going to be male. Okay, so we have our radio button here. So we have the male button and we also have the label. Okay, so now let's create another button for the female. So let's give a line break so it can be placed on the next line. So line break, and then input type radio. Okay, let's close it and let's give our label. All right, we are going to name this label female. Okay, so now let's give our for and ID attribute, just as the ones we gave to the text and email field. Now the main reason for giving the for and ID field is to make accessibility easy, so that when the user clicks on the name, just the name, it will select the button for the user. So as you can see, when I click on the male, the button is not selected. So let's do that. So let's do that for the male. So let's, in the input field, you have your ID, and then in the label you have your for. You should remember that by now. Okay, so in the input for the male, let's call the ID male, and then also call the for male, because as I said earlier on, the for and the ID should be the same. Now as you can see, when I click on just the male, it selects the button, right? So now let's do that for the female button as well. So in the input you have your ID, and then in your label you have for. So let's call, or let's give the for value as the for attribute value as female. Okay, and let's do that for the ID as well, female. Okay, so now you can see when you click on the female too, it gets selected. Now one thing you might notice is that when you click on both the male and the female, they both get selected. We have to fix that because there's an error, radios are supposed to or you can only select one options when you give the radio buttons. So you can't choose both. You can't, when it selects both, then meaning there's an error somewhere. So we need to fix this. Okay, so to solve this, we have to use the name attribute. Now, the name attribute prevents the user from selecting more than one option when given the radio buttons. Now, let's do that. Now, you have to specify that in the input field. So for the male, let's do that. So we have name attribute, and for the female, in the input tag, we also have name for the female. Okay, so now any name you give to the name attribute will prevent the user from selecting more than one button, right? So now the name has to be the same, so which means that the male and the female, they all belong to a class which you can call the gender class or the sex class or something. Now, any name we give to the name attribute will prevent the user from selecting more than one. So now, since they both belong to the gender class, let's give the name attribute value as gender. So gender, and then for the female, gender. Okay, so as you can see, after specifying the name attribute for the inputs, when you try to select both, as you can see, you can only choose one, right? So now the name is just trying to say, hey, I have two buttons, right? Male and female, they all belong to the gender class, so you can only select one. So that's what it simply means. So from these groups, or from this group, the gender group, you can only choose male or female. Now if you don't specify the name attribute for the input for the radio, the user can select more than one, which you don't want. So if you want to prevent that, then you have to specify the name attribute for the radio buttons, and they must be the same. For example, if you are working with colors or a list of items which you want the user to select only one, then all the name attributes for all the inputs must be the same, so the user can only choose one. So now let's have a look at the checkbox button. Okay, so the checkbox also allows the user to accept one or more items. So let's say we have a list of programming languages that we want the user to select based on the one he wants to learn or something. Let's say we are creating a form to accept data from students who want to learn a programming language. So let's do that. So let's give a general label. So let's do that. Let's do that in a paragraph. So let's call this choose the language you want. Okay, so we have our general label here, and right below the choose the language you want text, we start with our input and the label. So let's do that. So input and then label. So let's call this label HTML. Sorry for that. So HTML. Okay, so now let's give our type which is checkbox. Remember that. So we have checkbox. Okay, so now let's copy this. Okay, let's give a line break, and then let's paste that. Let's give another line break, and then paste that again. Let's paste that and give another line break. Okay, paste line break. Okay, so let's see HTML. Okay, so let's give 5 programming languages. So the last one. All right, let's change the text in them. Let's call this CSS cascading style sheet. Okay, and let's call this JavaScript. Okay, let's name them in caps lock. So JavaScript, let's change this to CSS. Okay, let's change this to PHP, and let's change the last one to Ruby. All right, so now we have a list of items. Okay, so let's deal with our for and ID. So in the label we have for. Okay, so for, and then we have in the input we have ID. Okay, so by now you should know the use of the for and the ID. So for the HTML, let's call this HTML, and then for the ID it has to be the same, so HTML. So when the user clicks on just HTML, it's gonna get selected. Okay, so now let's do that for CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and then Ruby. So let's do that. All right, so ID, CSS, and then in your label you have for CSS. Okay, so let's do that for JavaScript. Okay, so all right. All right, so we are done with the for and ID. So the next thing we have to do is give the name. So let's do that. So let's give them the same name. So they all belong to programming languages class, or let's say languages. So let's do that in the input field. So let's do that. So name language. Okay. All right, so we are done with the name. Okay, so now let's give the value attribute. Now the value attribute is being submitted to the server anytime the user clicks on the submit button. So let's see the user selects the HTML and Ruby. Now when the user clicks on the submit button, the value for the HTML and Ruby is being submitted to the server, telling the server that okay, the user selected these two. So the value attribute is very important in this case. So let's do that. So let's give a value for the checkbox. So let's start with HTML. So let's do that. Now you have to do that in the input field. So let's do that. So value. Now what is the value for this? So let's say HTML. All right, so let's do that for CSS as well. Okay, so this is the input field for CSS. Okay, value CSS. Let's do that for JavaScript. Okay, so we have value JavaScript. Let's do that for PHP as well. Value PHP. Then finally Ruby. Value Ruby. Okay, so now lest I forget, let's do that for the radio buttons as well. So for the input for mail, let's do that. So we have mail here. Okay, right in the input field, let's do that. So value mail. And let's do that for the female as well. Value female. All right, so when the user selects male and he or she hits on the submit button, the value for the male gets submitted to what? The server. So let's move to the next section. Okay, so let's talk about the reset and submit button. But before that, let's create another label and input field, the password input field. I forgot about that. Okay, so now let's do that right after the email. Okay, so let's give a line break, 2 line breaks, and then let's give our label. Okay, so we have our label. Let's name the label password. Okay, so we have our password. Let's give our input. So input. Okay, so this is our input. So the type for the input now is password. Okay, so now let's give our for an ID. So for the label we have for, let's call this PSSWD, short for password in this context. And then let's give our ID. The ID and the for has to be the same, remember that. Okay, so PSSWD. All right, so what's else? Okay, so in the input field, let's give our name. So name, the name for this is password. Okay, and the value, okay, so now let's call, or let's give a value password. Okay, so now for the password, let's take away the value. Okay, so let's take away the value. Now in place of the value, let's give a placeholder. So placeholder, and let's name this enter password. Okay, so we have our password field. So you can see that when you try to type anything password, it gets maxed, right? Okay, so now let's go to our input field for the submit and reset button. Okay, now for the submit button, the type is basically submit, and for the reset button, the type is reset. Okay, so now let's introduce our submit and reset button. So for the submit button, when the user clicks on the submit button, the data entered by the user gets submitted, and for the reset button, when the user clicks on it, it resets all the fields in the form, right? So let's do that. So first of all, let's give our line break. So BR. Okay, so BR, and then right after the BR, let's introduce our input. So we don't need a label for this. So input for the submit, let's create that. So we have input, and the type for this is what? Submit. As simple as that. So as you can see, we have a submit button here. So let's give another line break. So we push it to the next line. Okay, so we have our submit right here. Okay, so when you click on the submit, it submits the form, but since we don't have any value for the action and method, it doesn't show anything, or you don't see any changes. So we'll come to the action and method attribute very soon. So now let's create our reset button. So let's do that. So let's give another line break. Let's give 2. Okay, so we have 2 line break. Okay, so let's create the 2 on the same line. So we would have the submit right here and then the reset right there. Okay, so now let's give another input field, and then the type for this is basically reset. As simple as that. So we have submit button right here, and we have the reset button right here. So let's talk about this reset button. So let's say you tried filling your form, and then you made a mistake somewhere. Now you didn't want to delete the field, but rather you wanted to reset all the fields. So now let's fill the form. So let's do that. All right, okay, you can select anything you want here. So at blah blah blah.com. Okay, so now you wanted to reset the whole field. So now when you click on reset, let's see what happens. So reset, did you see that? Okay, so now let's do that again. Reset. Wonderful, right? Okay, so now let's talk about the submit button. Okay, so the submit button basically submits the form. So after the user completes the form, when he or she clicks on the submit button, the data from this form gets submitted to the address you specify in the action attribute. So the action attribute and the submit button work hand in hand. Now the action attribute specifies the location or the URL of where the data from the form should be submitted to. Now don't worry about the action attribute in this video. We are going to learn more about that in a standalone video. Okay, so you would have something like process underscore data.php. Now after the user clicks on the submit button, the data, which is the first name, second name, email, password, and all that of this form or from this form gets submitted to the process data.php. That's where the data is going to be processed for valid data and invalid data and all that. So don't worry about the action attribute. That I said, we are going to learn more about that in subsequent videos. Okay, so now the method has some values you need to specify: the post and the get. Now the post is recommended when you are handling sensitive data like the password and all that. Now the get is not recommended when dealing with sensitive data. So if you are dealing with data that is not sensitive, you can use the get value. But since we are dealing with password and all that, we have to use the post. Okay, so let's have a small experiment with the post and get. Now when you are dealing with sensitive data like the password and all that, it is very recommended to use the post method. Now when you use the get method and you click on the submit button, the data you entered is being displayed in the address bar, like the password and all that. Now this is very bad because you wouldn't want any third party to have access to your password or have a peep as your password. So that's why it is recommended to always use the post method when dealing with password and sensitive data. So now let's use the get and let's see. So first name, second name, email, and then your password, mail, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all that. Now when you try submitting the form, you get an error because you didn't give the right value to the email. So let's try that and see. Submit. Okay, so please include an @ in the email address. Okay, so let's do that. So at blah blah blah.com. Okay, so now let's hit submit. Okay, so now when you check your address bar, as you can see, most of the information you gave is being displayed in the address bar. Now this is very bad when dealing with sensitive data. That's why it is always recommended to use the post method when dealing with sensitive data. So let's try the post method and see. Okay, so we also have this error because the process data.php doesn't exist. We don't have anything like that processing the data. We just give a random name to the action attribute, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now let's try the post method. Okay, so now let's change this to post, right, since we are dealing with sensitive data and all that. Now let's save that. Okay, so now the live server automatically reloads, so you don't have to click on save, if and only if you have your auto save on. Okay, so now let's try entering our data again. Okay, password, mail, HTML, JavaScript, and then let's hit the submit. Okay, so now as you can see, check your address bar again. Now as you can see, you only have the process data.php. You don't have the password, you don't have the email, username, and all that. So this is very, very safe. So if you are dealing with, or when you are dealing with sensitive data in your form, it is always recommended to use the post method. And also we have this error because our process data.php doesn't exist. Okay, so you can also specify some values for the submit input button and also the reset button. So let's do that. So let's give a value attribute for the submit, and let's call that, sorry for that. Now let's call the attribute value for the value attribute. Let's call that send. So that will be our value name for the submit button. And also let's do that for the reset button. So value, and then let's call this reset. All right, so you can also do this to your submit and reset buttons. Okay, so HTML provides another tag known as the button tag or the button element. You can use that in place of the submit button of the input, right? So now to do that, you have to introduce the button element. So let's give a line break. So we send the button to the next line. Then you introduce your button element. Now the main difference between the input tag and the button element is that within the button element you can format text. So now in our button element we can name our button send. Now as you can see, we have our send button here. Now let's give another line break, so we send it to the next line. So BR. Okay, so we have our send button right here. Now the difference is that we can also format this send, so we can make it bold. So let's do that. So B. Now let's copy the text. So cut the text and then paste it within the bold elements. So now as you can see, our text has been formatted. Now this is the difference. This is the only difference. Now you can't do this with the input element. So now this is another way of creating a button, a clickable button on or in your HTML web document. And also one important thing you have to notice, you have to specify the type of button you are creating. So if you are creating a reset button or a submit button, you need to introduce a type in the opening tag. So type, and then you specify the type of button you are creating. So we have the submit. All right, so now this is another element that you can use for creating buttons in your HTML web document. Okay, so elements in HTML have their own default display values. Now elements in HTML can be either block elements or inline elements. Now when we say an element is a block, now it simply means that that element starts on a new line and it takes up the whole available width. Now we are going to have a closer look in our text editor, don't worry about that. And now when we say an element is an inline element, we simply mean that that element do not start on a new line and that element takes up as much width as necessary. So the major difference, or one of the differences between a block element and an inline element, is that block elements start on a new line and inline elements do not start on a new line. So let's go to our web browser and our text editor and let's have a practical feel of how they work. Okay, so now let's go through some block elements and inline elements in our HTML web document. So now we are going to do this with the developer tool. Now if you're on Windows, you can invoke the developer tool in your web browser by using the Control Shift and I. If you're on Mac, you can use Command Option and I. So now let's do that. So for Windows users, you use Control Shift and I. Okay, so now we have developer tool right here. So some of you might find yours um, at the bottom of your browser. Some of you also on your right, your left, or above, like how you are seeing in my web browser. So you can choose the location of the developer tool by clicking on this three dots right here, customize and control developer tool. So you click on it, and then you can see the dock side. You choose where you want to locate your developer tool. So I'm going to fix mine on the bottom. Okay, so now there it is. So now after doing that, you have to click on elements, the elements tab. So I have mine right here, and then you switch on the inspector, which is this box with the mouse pointer. So you just click on it, and then it switches on the inspector for you. Okay, so now you can see when you hover over an element, you can see it's being highlighted. Now we learned that block elements take up the whole width and they start on a new line. So as you can see here, when I hover over the headings elements, so we have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and then H6, you can see that it is taking up the whole width. So from here, from your left to your right, it is taking up the whole width. When you check all the headings elements, they are taking up the whole width, as you can see, and they are starting on new lines. So as you can see, we have the first heading on the first line, we have the second heading on the second line, the third heading on the third line, and all that. Now when you check the paragraph elements also, as you can see, when you hover over the element, it gets highlighted right here. So as you can see, okay, so now this is it. I seeing it right there. Okay, so now this is the paragraph element, and it is also starting on a new line, and it is taking up the whole width. Now if you should maximize the viewport of your browser, you can see that the width of the paragraph is also getting bigger, right? And the paragraph is taking up the whole width. So now the only difference between or one of the differences between a block element and an inline element is that block elements take up the whole width, they start on a new line, and then inline elements do not start on a new line, like the this strong formatted elements, right? When you click on it, you can see it is not starting on a new line, it is just taking the available width given by its parent element, and it is not starting on a new line. So as you can see, we have our list elements right here. If you should click on the list elements in the developer tool, the OL, if you should expand it, you can see it is taking up the whole width, and it is also starting on a new line. As you can see, the UL likewise, if you should go down, the table element also takes up the whole width. As you can see right there, it takes up the whole width, right, with its content in between or within. So as you can see, elements that start on a new line are block elements, and elements that do not start on a new line are called inline elements. Now we are going to have a look at the difference clearly when we start coding in CSS. We also have another display value known as the inline block. We are going to have a closer look at that in subsequent video. So now let's create some elements that are block and inline. So now let's go to the bottom of our content. Okay, so now right after the form closing tag, let's create a paragraph element. So we have our p opening tag and our p closing tag, and let's give some random text. So lorem and then 40, enter. So as you can see, it starts on a new line. It started on a new line. So if I should give an inline element like em and then say hi, it will start on a new line. Why? Because the form is being displayed on its own line, so the next element you bring will start on a new line. But this is not a block element, it's an inline element. So let's look at the difference. So let's go back to our p element. So you can do that with Control Z, which is undo. So now we have our paragraph elements right here. So now let's make a text bold. So let's make this text bold. So let's take it out and let's give our b element. So we have b, and let's nest the word in between. So as you can see, it is not starting on a new line. Why? Because it's an inline element. All the formatting, or most of the formatting elements that we worked with, the em elements, the b element, the I element, the subscript, the superscript, and all that, most of them are inline elements because they do not start on a new line, and they also do not take up the whole width. They don't take up the whole width. So now if I should try and nest this same word, if I should take off the b element and I should nest this word with the p element, let's work with that and see. So let's take this word out and let's nest it in between the p elements. So as you can see, that same word, which was an inline element, is now a block element because we are using a block element for it. We are nesting it in between a block element. So it is taking up the whole width now. So with the first one, it took up just the small width given by its parent element. So let's undo and see. You can see it is here, right here. Now let's change back to our p element and see. Let's take the word out and let's nest it in between a paragraph element. Wow. So it's now a block element because we gave it a block element tag, a block element tag. So elements in your web document that will start on a new line are all known as block elements, and they take up the whole width. And inline elements do not start on a new line and they do not take up the whole width. So block elements will take up the width 100%. So it will take up the width of the browser from left to right. All right. So block elements start on a new line and inline elements do not start on a new line. Okay, so let's have a look at semantic and non-semantic elements. Okay, semantic elements are elements that clearly describe their meaning to both the browser and the developer. So for example, when you use the p tag, the browser knows that you are using the paragraph element. When you use the form element, the browser knows that you are displaying a form. When you use the table element, the browser also knows that you are displaying a table. And also when another developer sees your source code or your HTML text content, he or she will be able to know that okay, this is a table. So that's one importance of using semantic elements. And also another important thing is that semantic elements help screen readers to render website contents to visually impaired people who cannot see what you are displaying or what is being displayed in a web browser. They need screen readers, and screen readers can best function when you make proper use of semantic elements. Now, some example of semantic elements that we have in HTML5 we have the header element, we have the main element, we have the footer element, the nav element, section, article, aside, and more. Now you can search on the internet and learn more about these semantic elements. So now let's have a look at what non-semantic elements are. Okay, so non-semantic elements are just the opposite of semantic elements. They describe nothing about their content. And two of the mostly used non-semantic elements are the div and the span element. Now don't worry, we'll have a closer look at that when we start coding in our HTML web document. Okay, so now you might want to divide your website into sections semantically. So you have your header, your nav, which contains all the navigation links to other sections in your website. You have the main, which contains the main section. You have some articles which are nested in the article element, and you have your footer, which consists of your copyright and your company logo, and also where your website users can contact you and all that. Now, non-semantic elements does the opposite of this. They don't give any meaning, like how semantic elements describe their contents. So if you want to divide your website into sections, without using the semantic elements, you can use the div for that. It does the same job as the header, nav, main, footer, and all that. So if you want to divide your web document into sections without using semantic elements, you can use the div. And if you also want to style some inline words, right, or if you want to style some inline content in your HTML web document, you can nest those contents within the span element. Now, don't worry about this. You understand when we start coding in our HTML. Now, we will make use of the span elements when we are coding or when we are using CSS for styling our HTML documents. So let's go to our web browser. So we go through some semantic and non-semantic elements. Okay, so now let's go through some semantic elements and non-semantic elements. So now let's create another HTML file. So now you go to your Visual Studio File Explorer right here with this to file logo, and then you click on new file. Okay, so now let's call this block inline.html, and then enter. Okay, so now let's close it back. Okay, so now we have a block inline.html right here. So let's start with our HTML structure. So we have our doc type HTML, and then we have our HTML root element. Okay, and then right in between our HTML root element, we have the head section, and then right after the head section, we have the body section. Okay, so in between the head, we have our title, the title of our web document, which is block and inline element. Okay, so now let's launch this with live server. So right click in your HTML web document, and then you click on live server. Okay, so we have our contents right here. Okay, so live server has automatically rendered our content for us. So as you can see, when you check the title bar, you can see we have block and inline elements. Okay, so let's create some content in our body elements. Okay, so now let's make use of some semantic elements. Okay, so now let's create a heading for our web document, and so we are going to nest this in between the header because it is the top section of our website. So in our header we have our h1, and also remember that a website can contain only one h1 element. Remember that. You can search that online and know why. Okay, so we have our h1. Let's call this about Codetopia. Okay, so we have our heading right here. Okay, so now right after our heading, let's give some navigation links to other sections of our website, like the contact me, or contact us. We have the home and the about us and all that. So since they are links, we have to nest that in between the nav elements. Now this will help screen readers to render contents appropriately to visually impaired people, and it will also help the web browser to interpret our HTML web content appropriately. So we have our nav right here. We have our nav. Okay, so now let's create our navigation links, which are lists. So now let's do that. Okay, so now let's create our links, which are lists. So we have home, about us, and then contact us. So we have li, so we are listing. Sorry, we have to do that in the unordered list. You can do that with the ordered list, but I prefer doing it with the ul. So on ordered list, anytime you want to list, choose the type of list you want to use, whether you want to use the unordered list or the ordered list. So I want to use the ul. So another list, and then I start listing. So li, I have about us, and then I have li sorry, let's make this one home. So let's make the first one home. So we have home, and then the second one is about us, and then the third one is contact us. Okay, so we have home, about us, contact us. Now we want to make this list links. We want to turn them into links, so we have to nest the sections in between the A element, which is the anchor element. So let's nest this in between the anchor element. So let's take it out, and then let's bring our A element. Okay, and let's nest it in between. Okay, so now you will not see any changes here because we have not yet provided the href. So let's do that for the second one also, and then the third one. Okay, so now we have our lists in the making. So let's provide a href attribute to the link. So we have href, and let's give a target. So we have our targets. Okay, so let me minimize my web browser, then maximize my HTML web document. Okay, so now we have our target. So now let's copy these attributes and let's paste them in the other list. Okay, so now now you can see they are links, right? So you can click on it and it will navigate to other sections. Okay, let me maximize. Okay, so now as you can see, okay, so the href specifies the destination of your link when you click on it, and also the target also specifies whether the link should be launched in a new tab or in the same tab. Okay, so now let's provide some hrefs and targets to our links. Okay, so now since we don't have any content for the home, about us and contact us, let's make them dead links. Now if you want to make a link a dead link, you just have to provide the hash symbol in the href attribute. So hash, or some of you might see the hashtag. Okay, so we have the hash, and then in the target, as I said, the target specifies whether the link should be launched in a different tab or in the same tab. Now if you want to launch the link in a different tab or in another tab, you have to provide the blank value, right, for the target. So underscore and then blank. Now if you want to launch that link in the same tab, you can use the self. So you bring underscore and then you spell self. So as you can see, the home will launch in another tab, and the about us will launch in the same tab. Now let's make the contact us also. Let's make it a blank target. So blank. Okay, so now let's try that and see. Now when I click on the home, it will launch in another tab. So let's click on the home. As you can see, it has launched in another tab. So now let's close that one, and then let's try clicking on the about us, which we made or which we provided self. It will launch in the same tab. So about us, as you can see, it's launched in the same tab. Okay, so now let's move on. Okay, so now let's create some articles and sections. So you can have different sections in your web document. Now you have to do that with a section tab. So you can have a section for maybe about us. You can have a section which talks about you, the developer. You can have a section which talks about the company and all that. So let's do that. So we have sections. So we have section. This section will be about Codetopia, and the second section will be about the developer of the website. We are just making something up. And then the third section will be about members in Codetopia. So we have our section. So we have three sections: first section, second section, and then the third section. So now let's create some articles within the sections. Okay, so let's create some articles in our section. So but first of all, let's create some comments. So this section is about Codetopia. So let's call this about Codetopia, and then let's call the second section about developer, and then or about developers. Okay, and then let's call the third section about Codetopia members. All right, so now in our section, let's create some articles. So let's do that in the article semantic tag or element. So we have article, and then we have another article for the second section. All right, and for the about Codetopia members, we have another article. Okay, so now in the article, let's give a heading and then a paragraph. So in this article, as I said, you must have only one H1 in your HTML document. So the next headings that you create can have multiple H2s, it doesn't matter, but all what you must notice, your HTML web documents must consist of only one H1. So we want to create some headings for articles, so let's do that with the H2. All right, so this is for the about Codetopia article heading. Let's do this for about developers article heading, so H2, and then let's do this for about Codetopia members, so H2. Okay, so now let's call this about, let's call the heading about Codetopia. All right, okay, so about Codetopia. Okay, so now let's make this about Codetopia community, the main heading. So let's make it about Codetopia community. Okay, so now let's call this about Codetopia, and then the second heading for, or the H2 for the about developers, let's call this about developers. Okay, and then let's call the last one in the about members section about Codetopia members. Okay, so now in our articles in the section, let's create some paragraphs. So paragraphs, and let's give it some lorem text. So lorem, and let's make this lorem 100 and then enter. Okay, so we have some content right here, and then in our second section, let's in our second section article, let's make this, let's create another paragraph. So lorem 100 enter. Okay, so we have another section, we have another paragraph, sorry, and then in our last section article, let's create another paragraph. So lorem 100. All right, so we are creating our website. Cool, right? Now this is nice, but not all presentable. You can make it presentable with CSS, which we are going to have a look at in subsequent videos. Okay, so now in the about developers, or let's see in the about Codetopia members, let's create another link, right? So links are inline elements. Now they will not be created, this link will not be created on a new line. It will just continue with the or it will just be nested in a paragraph. We will just nest it in a paragraph, so it will not be created on a new line because it's an inline element. So let's create some random text in the about members, right, or in the about developers. Let's link that link, or let's link that link to our content we created right here. So we are going to link this, we are going to link both using the anchor tag. Okay, so now in the about developers, let's do this. Okay, so let's see visit project here. Okay, so we have visit project here. Now let's make the here the link, let's make it a link. So let's take the here out, control and then X. So we've taken the here out, so let's nest it in between the anchor tag. Okay, so we have it right here. Okay, so now it's not a link yet because we've not provided the href. Okay, so now let's do that. So we have our here, so we have visit project here. So anytime the user clicks on here, it will redirect that user to our project, this project. Okay, so now let's create some href. So we have href, which will contain the location of our project, our second project. And also let's provide a target. So we have a target. Let's make it blank. We want it to open in another tab. Okay, so blank. And then in our href, since they are both in the same directory or folder, we just have to give reference to the name. So what is the name, or what is the file name of the first project we created? It is index.html, as you can see right here, right? Index.html. So let's call that in the href. So index.html. All right, so now as you can see, we are almost done with our project. Okay, so now let's click on it and see what will happen. So let's click on the here. So when I click on here, you can see it has brought us to our project. Okay, so now in our first project, let's create another link to send out back to the the web document we just created. So let's do that. I think let's do that right here. So let's go to our index.html, and then right after this paragraph, let's create a link. So let's call this, okay, so let's create this in a paragraph. Okay, so in the paragraph, let's say click here to move, or click here to block inline. Okay, so click here to block inline. Okay, so let's nest this between a link. So we have our link. So let's cut this off and let's nest it in between the anchor. All right, so now we have it right here, as you can see. So now let's make this a link. So we have our href, and then let's provide our target. So we have our target. Let's make it blank. All right, so in our href, we want to go back to the block inline element. So let's just call the name since they are both in the same folder. So block inline dot html. All right, so now if I click on it, we are back to our project, right? So you can move back and forth. So as you can see, when I click on here, as you can see, we are here. If I should click on block inline, we are back to our project. Okay, so we don't want it to open in new tabs anytime we click on them. So now let's change the blank to self. All right, so we have self right here, and then in the block inline, let's change this also to self. Okay, so now let's close the other tabs. Okay, so now when I click on here in the same tab, right? When you click on block inline in the same tab also, so we can move back and forth. Okay, so now let's go back to our block inline. So okay, so now we are done with our sections and articles. So let's go to our footer. Okay, so now let's introduce our footer. So we have our footer semantic element. So we have our footer. Okay, so in our footer we can have a paragraph, and then we have our copyright sign, and then we have the company name or the developer name. So we can see, so if you want to use the copyright sign, you can bring the ampersand, and then you write copy, and then you bring semicolon. So as you can see, we have our copyright sign right there. Okay, so let me maximize my web browser font. So as you can see, we have our copyright logo right here, and then you bring the name of the developer or your company. So let's call this so copyright, and then let's say Codetopia community. Okay, right, so this can be your footer. So we are going to learn more about these elements when we start solving some projects. So this brings us to the end of our crash course. See you in the next video. Subscribe, leave a comment, and click on that like button. So see you in the next video, guys.